Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Tonight we're visiting a place where paranoia was the main export and the trees probably watched you die. Gévaudan, France, mid-1760s. Forget everything you think you know about historical monsters. The scariest ones usually wear breeches and a powdered wig. You live in fear. Every night another scream echoes from the woods. They say it's a beast, a wolf. But you know deep down, it's something far more terrifying, something that enjoys the hunt a little too much, something with eyes that aren't quite animal. This isn't a cozy history lesson. It's a survival gauntlet where the authorities are more interested in protecting royal egos than your neck. So before we plunge into the muck and the blood, hit like and subscribe. But only if you're ready for history's ugly truth, the kind that makes you question what lurks in the shadows of your own time. And let me know in the comments, if you were a peasant in Gévaudan, what would be your weapon of choice? A pitchfork, a prayer book, or just really fast legs? Now dim the lights, brace yourself, and step into history's darkest corners, where the trees are watching and they're not on your side. The year is 1764. Gévaudan is a rugged, isolated corner of south-central France, all mountains and forests and people who mostly just want to be left alone. Suddenly, that peace is shattered by something utterly savage. A young shepherdess, Jean Boulet, is found torn to shreds near the village of Langogny, the first official victim. Think they cared about an inconvenient peasant girl's death? Not really, not at first. The initial report probably blamed wolves, because wolves were convenient, four-legged scapegoats for the harsh realities of rural life. 1 in 3 peasants died before age 30 here anyway. What's one more body? Then the attacks keep happening. They're brutal, targeting faces and throats, often leaving bodies headless or disemboweled. The smell of wet earth and blood becomes the region's new perfume. Witnesses struggle to describe it. It's large, they say, not quite a wolf, maybe bigger, faster, with reddish fur and an oddly flat head. It wasn't just killing for food, it seemed to kill for the sheer bloody hell of it. They called it justice. The corpses called it Tuesday. Fear, thick and suffocating as the mountain fog begins to creep from village to village. Your rent anxiety, try the fear of going outside your door knowing you might be the next snack. The sound of leaves rustling sends chills down your spine. Is it just the wind, or is something stalking you? News of the escalating slaughter finally trickles up the chain of command, eventually landing on the desk of Louis XVI in faraway Versailles. The king, basking in the glow of absolute monarchy, couldn't have commoners getting eaten by, well, something. It was bad for PR, so he did what kings do, he sent in the big guns. First up was Captain Duhamel, a military man dispatched to organize local hunts. His strategy: hunt all the wolves. Simple, right? Just scour vast forests the size of small countries and eliminate every single potential suspect with fur. It was like trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. Bounties were offered, but the bodies kept piling up. The attacks were often in broad daylight, defying typical wolf behavior. The touch of the victim's rough, torn clothes was a grim reminder that conventional wisdom was failing. The beast seemed almost supernatural, avoiding traps and surviving gunshots. This thing wasn't just hungry, it seemed intelligent, almost toying with its pursuers. They called it a royal hunt. The beast probably called it target practice. The king's involvement only highlighted the disconnect between the gilded palace and the muddy reality of Gévaudan. While courtiers debated theology and fashion, people here were just trying not to get their faces ripped off before dinner. This wasn't just an animal, it was a crisis of faith in authority. All right, you survived the royal indifference and the general incompetence of the first wave of hunters. Feeling smug? Good, because history loves to prove you wrong just when you get comfortable. Louis XVI, bless his oblivious heart, decided Captain Duhamel wasn't getting the job done. So he sent in the real expert, Francois Antoine, the king's lieutenant of the hunt and arquebus bearer. Basically, the guy who handed Louis his fancy guns. Surely this guy would solve everything. Antoine arrived in 1765 with a massive retinue and even grander self-importance. His mission was simple: kill the beast and parade its carcass around like a trophy. He organized massive drives through the forest, employing hundreds of peasants and soldiers. The sound of shouting men and baying dogs filled the air, a desperate symphony against the silent terror. In September 1765, Antoine's team got a big one. A huge gray wolf shot by Antoine's son was killed at the Abbey of Chazes. It weighed 130 pounds and looked genuinely fearsome. Antoine promptly declared it the beast, stuffed its hide, and sent it to Versailles as proof. They called it victory. The villagers still burying their dead called it a temporary inconvenience. The king was reportedly delighted, displaying the stuffed wolf proudly. Bounties were paid, congratulations were exchanged. They literally shipped the supposed monster to the palace, confident the nightmare was over. This wasn't solving a problem. This was a PR campaign with teeth marks. For a few months, things quieted down. The smell of fear started to dissipate, replaced by the usual smells of wood smoke and damp wool. Maybe, just maybe, Antoine was right. Then the screams started again. Same brutality, same targets, same sickening efficiency. The beast was back, or more likely, it had never left. All right, Antoine the king's hunter rode off into the sunset, probably expecting a medal and a lifetime supply of fancy cheese. He'd killed a wolf, declared victory, and basically told Gévaudan to stop being dramatic. They called it a job well done. The beast called it dessert being briefly interrupted. Within weeks, maybe months, the screams started up again. The attacks were just as savage, just as inexplicable, often happening in the same areas, targeting the same types of victims. The smell of blood, briefly absent, returned to hang heavy in the humid air. The renewed terror was almost worse than the first wave. It proved that the fancy royal intervention had achieved precisely nothing, except wasting a ton of taxpayer money. Think the king's hunter fixed it? He just provided a nice tax-funded vacation for an ineffective bureaucrat. The victims continued to be predominantly women and children working alone in fields or tending livestock, but sometimes, chillingly, adult men were targeted too. This thing wasn't just preying on the weak. It seemed to revel in the challenge, adding another layer to the growing suspicion that this wasn't just an animal. This was something different, something perhaps even enjoying the hunt. Local officials scrambled again, organizing more hunts, setting more traps, offering meager local bounties. But the beast evaded them all, leaving behind a trail of torn flesh and shattered lives. The touch of muddy boots on the cold ground meant another body had been found. They called it justice. The perpetually terrified villagers just called it Monday. Okay, so the king's personal sharpshooter bagged a big dog, declared the problem solved, and probably got a promotion. Meanwhile, back in Gévaudan, the blood was still soaking into the ground, proving royalty is often the last to know what's actually happening. You thought the nightmare was over, it was just getting interesting. With the official beast dead and buried, the continued attacks sent the region spiraling into deeper panic. The locals weren't stupid. They knew a dead wolf didn't keep killing people. The smell of fresh blood mixed with fear became a constant, sickening presence. This failure of the official solution cracked open the door for wilder theories. If it wasn't the wolf Antoine killed, what was it? Whispers started in the taverns and churches. Maybe it was a sorcerer controlling a beast, a punishment from God, or a loup-garou, a werewolf. 1 in 5 villagers probably secretly suspected their weird uncle. The descriptions of the beast became even more inconsistent, fueled by terror and folklore. Some said it walked on its hind legs, others noted strange tufts of hair or unnatural speed. The flickering candlelight in peasant homes cast terrifying shadows. turning every rustle in the dark into a potential monster. Local priests organized public prayers and processions, hoping divine intervention would succeed where royal hunters failed. The touch of rosary beads offered little comfort against the gnawing fear that pressed in like the dark forest itself. They called it faith. The beast called it another opportunity while everyone was distracted. The most disturbing theory, however, began to gain traction. What if it wasn't an animal at all? What if it was a human, perhaps disguised, perhaps just utterly savage, using the chaos as cover for serial murder? This absurd comparison, a mythical monster versus a regular person, highlighted the terrifying possibility that evil didn't need fangs to be effective. The sound of worried whispers in confined spaces was almost as chilling as the screams from the woods. Thought killing a single wolf would fix centuries of fear and incompetence. You wish. Prepare for the sequel, starring more pointless hunts and even less hope. With Antoine gone and the bodies piling up again, the problem landed back in the laps of the local authorities. Enter the Marquis de Tournai and the Comte de Morangis, noblemen tasked with restoring order. Their approach: more hunting parties, bigger, noisier, and just as ineffective as the last. They organized massive battues, essentially human walls sweeping through the forest, trying to flush out the beast. Hundreds, sometimes thousands, of peasants and soldiers would beat the bushes, shouting and making noise. The sound of this desperate human wave was probably more terrifying to the participants than the beast itself. Did these new hunters fare better? Only if your definition of better includes more bodies discovered shortly after the hunt concluded. These hunts were often plagued by poor coordination and conflicting orders, a perfect reflection of France's fragmented administration before the revolution. Trying to catch the beast with these guys was like trying to catch smoke with a colander. The rough, splintered wood of the local gallows seemed a more reliable outcome for someone, even if it wasn't the beast. Despite the mounting evidence that this wasn't just an animal, the official line stubbornly stuck to the wolf theory. It was easier to blame a wild creature than admit a human monster might be operating freely, or worse, that they were utterly incapable of protecting their own people. They were experts at killing normal wolves. This wasn't normal. This was a job application for the devil, and he seemed overqualified. Hope springs eternal, they said. In Gévaudan, death was the only thing that sprang reliably, leaving behind the persistent, unsettling smell of damp earth and decay that no amount of fresh air could clear. The cold feel of iron traps left empty was a constant reminder of their failure. The dark forest canopy watched it all, impassive and ancient. You've watched the king's men fail, then the local nobles flail, and still the body count climbs. Feeling abandoned yet? You should be. Because when the suits in charge can't fix it, things get truly desperate, and local legends start looking a lot more appealing than royal decrees. As the official hunts continued to be a grotesque comedy of errors, the people of Gévaudan started relying on themselves. Forget the fancy muskets from Versailles. They grabbed pitchforks, axes, anything that could potentially ward off the nightmare with teeth. The smell of sweat and fear filled the air as villagers formed their own patrols, often armed with little more than courage and desperation. Among these locals was a man named Jean Chastel. He wasn't a nobleman or a king's hunter. He was just a local innkeeper and farmer with a reputation for being a bit odd. While the professional hunters were busy staging elaborate, empty spectacles, men like Chastel were out in the real woods, the ones where the wet leaves stuck to your boots and every snapped twig sounded like a death knell. They called him a simple man. History would call him the guy who maybe, just maybe, finally ended it. The attacks in 1766 and 1767 became almost routine, a horrifying part of daily life. Mothers warned children not to stray from sight, farmers worked in groups, casting anxious glances at the tree line. 1 in 4 villagers probably had a close call or knew someone who did. The rough texture of the forest floor was often the last thing victims felt. Reports continued to describe a creature of unnatural strength and cunning, able to vanish as quickly as it appeared. The sound of distant screams became a chilling lullaby. This wasn't just survival of the fittest, it was the ultimate game of hide-and-seek, and humanity was losing spectacularly. They called it a divine test. The beast probably called it Tuesday. So the fancy hunters failed, the local nobles stumbled, and now we're down to a quirky innkeeper with a blessed silver bullet. Feeling confident? You shouldn't be. Because even if the beast was killed, the story of Gévaudan was far from over. The year is 1767. The terror has gripped Gévaudan for 3 long, bloody years. Enter Jean Chastel again. He was a local, he knew the terrain, and crucially, he allegedly carried a medal of the Virgin Mary and a gun loaded with a silver bullet blessed, of course. Because when logic fails, you might as well try divine intervention mixed with folklore. The cold, smooth feel of the silver bullet was more comforting than any official proclamation. On June 19, 1767, Chastel was out hunting with a group. According to legend, the beast suddenly appeared. Chastel, after calmly reading his prayer book, supposedly raised his gun and fired. The shot echoed through the forest, a sound that carried the weight of years of fear and suffering. A large canid, identified as a wolf, fell dead. It was reportedly enormous with unusual features. Chastel claimed this was the beast. Unlike the previous beast, this one was examined more thoroughly, though the findings were vague and eventually lost. The smell of gunpowder mixed with death filled the air. They dragged the carcass back to the nearest town, exhibiting it like a morbid carnival sideshow. The relief among the populace was immense, palpable as the morning mist. They called it the end. The lingering feeling of dread in the pit of your stomach called it a temporary reprieve. Was this really the beast? Or just another large wolf in an area full of them? The details are murky, the accounts conflicting. But for the exhausted people of Gévaudan, it was enough. They needed it to be over. They needed a body, a symbol, something to finally lay the nightmare to rest. The rough rope used to drag the carcass was a symbol of their desperate hope. So a guy with a prayer book and a silver bullet supposedly bagged the monster. Problem solved, right? Everyone lived happily ever after in the sunshine? Absolutely not. This is history, not a Disney movie. The beast might have been dead, but the questions, the theories, and the sheer horror of what had happened lingered like the smell of old blood. Even after Jean Chastel's kill, the story of the Beast of Gévaudan didn't neatly wrap up with a bow. Sure, the widespread attacks stopped. The daily terror subsided, replaced by a more generalized unease. The sound of children playing in the fields no longer automatically triggered panic attacks. But the official confirmation was lackluster, and the detailed examination of the carcass was, well, let's just say it wasn't exactly a CSI-level investigation. The theories about what the beast really was didn't disappear. They multiplied like rabbits. Was it a particularly large, aggressive wolf subspecies? A hyena somehow escaped from a menagerie, a man-wolf hybrid, a product of forbidden acts? Or was it, as the most disturbing theory suggested, simply a human serial killer, perhaps the Chastel family themselves, who had used a trained animal or even just the fear of the beast to cover their tracks? 1 in 2 historians probably leans towards the human culprit theory. The historical records are a mess of conflicting reports, exaggerations fueled by panic, and deliberate obfuscation by authorities who looked utterly foolish throughout the whole ordeal. The touch of brittle, yellowed documents from the period offers no clear answers, only more questions. They called it historical record. You'd call it a conspiracy theorist's playground. The Beast of Gévaudan became a legend, a cautionary tale whispered around fireplaces. It wasn't just a story about a monster. It was a story about fear, about authority failure, and about the terrifying things humans are capable of, whether they have fangs or just a twisted mind. The taste of stale bread and fear became a lasting memory for the survivors. You've just witnessed a prayer book and a silver bullet potentially ending a 3-year reign of terror. Feeling closure, don't get comfortable. Because while the beast might have been dead on the ground, the messiest part of the story, the human part, was just beginning to unravel. So Jean Chastel kills a large canid. The carcass is examined, but not exactly with scientific rigor. It's quickly buried because, well, it started to smell. The immediate need was relief, not forensic accuracy. The smell of decay was probably a welcome change from the smell of fresh blood, for a little while at least. But doubt lingered. The animal killed didn't perfectly match all the witness descriptions, which, granted, were all over the map thanks to mass hysteria. And the fact that the attacks immediately stopped after Chastel's kill seemed almost too convenient, almost like the person responsible knew exactly when to stop. They called it divine intervention. Anyone with half a brain cell called it suspicious timing. Whispers about the Chastel family intensified. Jean Chastel himself was a bit of a local character, and his son, Antoine, had a criminal record and was known for his violent temper. Was it possible that a human, perhaps Antoine Chastel, trained an animal to kill? Or worse, that he was the killer, perhaps wearing an animal skin, using the beast myth as the perfect cover? This wasn't just about catching a monster. It was about facing the possibility that the monster was one of their own. Authorities, having looked spectacularly inept for years, weren't exactly keen to open a can of worms involving a potential human serial killer, especially one whose father was now being hailed as a hero. Blaming a dead animal was far tidier. The rough texture of peasant suspicion was harder to smooth over than a carcass. They called it peace restored. You'd call it a cover-up wrapped in a prayer book. The sound of nervous coughs replaced outright screams, a subtle but lingering sign that the terror wasn't truly gone, just pushed beneath the surface. The 18th century is over, Louis XV is headless, and the Beast of Gévaudan is firmly entrenched in legend. It's a story told and retold, often embellished, a campfire tale that sends shivers down your spine. But why does it stick? Because it taps into something primal. The fear of the dark woods, the unknown predator, and the terrifying idea that even the people you know could be monsters. The chilling feel of a cold, unsolved case resonates even centuries later. For centuries, people debated. Cryptozoologists wondered if it was a surviving prehistoric creature, a relic from another time. Historians dug through archives, finding those confusing, contradictory accounts, trying to piece together a truth that might no longer be findable. Was it a wolf-dog hybrid, a foreign animal escaped from a traveling show, or just a particularly cunning, rabid wolf? Science offered theories, but no definitive body. The sound of academic debate is far less compelling than a good monster story, isn't it? But the most unsettling theories always circle back to the human element. The timing of the attacks, the targeted victims, the apparent intelligence, it all points to a human hand. Maybe it was Antoine Chastel, maybe someone else entirely. The truth is lost to time, buried with the unnamed dead and the quickly buried carcass. The taste of mystery is often more unsettling than the taste of resolution. The Beast of Gévaudan isn't just a historical curiosity, it's a mirror. It shows how easily mass hysteria can take hold, how authorities can prioritize image over public safety, and how we often prefer to believe in a supernatural monster than face the possibility of pure, unadulterated human evil. Your fear of the unknown. It's just the modern version of the Gévaudan peasant looking into the dark woods, smelling the damp earth, and wondering if something human or otherwise is waiting. You thought killing a single wolf would fix centuries of fear and incompetence. You wish. Prepare for the sequel, starring more pointless hunts and even less hope. The attack stopped, but the myth took root. The Beast of Gévaudan became more than just a dead animal or a historical incident. It became a legend, passed down through generations, evolving with each retelling. It was far easier to talk about a terrifying monster from the woods than about the sheer, terrifying incompetence of the powerful. Ballads were sung, pamphlets were printed with lurid illustrations, each adding a new detail, a new terror, often wildly contradictory. The feel of cheap paper, crudely inked, spread the fear and the legend far beyond Gévaudan's isolated borders. They called it news and folklore. You'd call it clickbait and viral content, 18th century style. Historians poring over the surviving documents find a chaotic mix of official denials, panicked witness accounts, and folklore creeping into the facts. The king's official report downplayed the whole thing after Antoine killed his wolf, desperately trying to save face and sweep the embarrassment under the royal rug. Your uncle's conspiracy theory bulletin board probably makes more sense than the official explanation. The story endures because it asks uncomfortable questions that still echo today. What are we willing to believe when faced with inexplicable horror and failure? How quickly do we blame the unknown when the known systems collapse under pressure? The sound of those unanswered questions echoes through the centuries, a chilling reminder of human nature. Was it a hyper-aggressive animal, a biological anomaly maybe driven mad by rabies? Perhaps. Was it a human predator using the chaos and legend to commit heinous acts under the ultimate cover? Increasingly likely, given the patterns and the convenient timing of the end. The brutal taste of this lingering uncertainty is far more unsettling than any clear-cut resolution. They called it history. We call it a grim reminder that the scariest monsters are often the ones we create, or worse, the ones who look just like us, walking around on two legs. You've journeyed through the fear, the failed hunts, the conflicting stories, and the very convenient death of a large wolf. You've seen how panic twists reality and how easily officials can look like idiots when faced with something truly terrifying. The Beast of Gévaudan. Monster, myth, or man, the truth, as always, is messier and far less comforting than a simple monster story. It highlights how quickly reason evaporates under pressure, how desperately people cling to any explanation, no matter how outlandish, and how easily human cruelty can hide behind a convenient scapegoat. The smell of fear and incompetence still hangs heavy over the historical records. The beast might be dead, but the lessons of Gévaudan are very much alive. How do you react when the systems meant to protect you fail? How do you discern truth from panic-fueled fiction? And how unsettling is the thought that sometimes the most horrific things are done not by mythical creatures, but by ordinary people driven by something dark and inexplicable? You thought this was just a creepy historical footnote about a big bad wolf. It's not. It's a cold reminder that the line between human and monster is thinner than you think, and that the beast you should really worry about might not have fangs or fur. It might just have a motive, an opportunity, and a terrifying lack of conscience walking right alongside you. They called it the Beast of Gévaudan. Just remember, every era has its monsters.